I will disappoint you. I will tell you that I don't. I mean, please don't repeat that to anyone, and I will pretend I never said it. No, but there are no tests out there that can scientifically predict the impact of an advertising on sales. If an agency or a research provider tells you that they can predict the impact of advertising on sales, I think they're lying.
Welcome to That's What I Call Marketing, the podcast where you'll hear from the leading lights in the marketing world and listen to their unique insights. Today I'm joined by a wonderful guest. As always, it is François Bazini, who is CMO of Suntory Beverage and Food Europe, and it's a fascinating conversation. Now, before we get into today's episode, if you're enjoying That's What I Call Marketing and can rate or review the show, it really does help us reach even more people. The algorithms don't do much for the old organic reach, as you well know as marketers. So things like commenting, rating, reviewing, sharing really do help more and more people discover That's What I Call Marketing. And there's 43,000 people that are tuned into That's What I Call Marketing every single week. So we'd love more and more people to discover the show and our episodes. Today is an episode that is brought to you by Tracksuit, the always-on affordable brand tracking dashboard. And Tracksuit is now available in 25 markets. So if you need to track your brand consistently over a number of different markets, you need to go tracksuit.com and find out all about the power of the Tracksuit dashboard. We talk about brand health and brand tracking in today's episode with François. He's had an incredible career. He has, as you hear, he moved to Toronto, starting off as marketing. He went to BCG to figure out what the world of consulting was like. I think he left some of the nasty stuff behind. I've met people who just kept it with them. And he had time in Danone, PepsiCo, and now is with Suntory and works on an incredible portfolio of brands. He's worked across incredible brands, but he is now working with the likes of Schweppes, Lucozade, Ribena, Orangina, Tropicana has been in his portfolio in the past, Lou Biscuits as well. The episode kind of splits itself naturally into two. We don't talk until kind of the second half of the episode about some of the marketing campaigns he's worked on. We talk a lot at the start, really fascinating for any marketer, how we can be just fact-based marketers, how we can have great relationships with finance, how we need to be brand CEOs, and how that kind of shifts your dynamic. And we talk about what it's like to be an in-country marketer versus a regional or global marketer. We talk also about his work with Ribena and his work with Schweppes as well. And we get to hear his DAQV approach. So you're going to have to stay tuned to find out what that's about. He has amazing one-liners and things I'm going to be using in the future. At least I'll give François credit if I use them. Listen, let's get into today's episode with the wonderful François Bazini. François, thank you so much for joining me on That's What I Call Marketing.
Good. Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Brilliant. Well, listen, there is so much for us to chat about, but it's always good to hear from people in your position, how you got there. You kind of a strategist who became a brand builder. Tell me about
I started my career actually in Canada. I did 5 years in Canada, in Toronto, working for Group Danone on their water and biscuit brands. So the water brands are Evian and Lou Biscuits. It was great because, as a marketeer, working abroad forces you to do what every marketeer should, which is to carefully listen to consumers. You cannot assume that you know anything about them. Yes. So it really teaches you the hard way that you should be humble and pay attention to consumer behaviors, attitude, and really study hard. So that was a good school of marketing for me. But after that, I wanted to do more, and I wanted to work in strategy consulting. Those big names of McKinsey, BCG made me, I was a bit fantasizing about those. So I came back to Europe and I joined BCG, which was a fabulous experience because, it's places where you work very hard.
They get their pay.
You learn immensely as well. And I can come back to that if you want, but it's a really great school of business. And after that, I was recruited by one of my clients, which was PepsiCo, to be their marketing director for France. And then with PepsiCo, I moved to London, where I was marketing director for the JV between PepsiCo and Unilever on Lipton Ice. The two companies had joined forces in iced tea. PepsiCo with its beverage experience, and of course Unilever with their brand, Lipton. And they had created this JV called PLI, Pepsi Lipton International, to market Lipton Iced Tea internationally. So I was in charge of that. And then PepsiCo moved me to the US, to New York. So that was a dream of any marketer working for PepsiCo in New York. That was fun. And there I worked on innovation, a lot of projects on innovation. And after that, an ex-PepsiCo guy by the name of Albert Baladi, who is someone I really admired, he was a legend at Pepsi, called me up and said, I worked for this Japanese company that is working in spirits called Suntory. Why don't you join us in Europe and work on in the spirits category? So that's what I did. And I came back to Europe, and I've been working now for 12 years in their spirits division a lot, and now in their soft drink division.
There's so much there. The interesting thing for me, well, there's lots of interesting things in there, but I think that the BCG work and, overlaying that then into kind of your strategy innovation, what things you learned to BCG? Because you're right, they're tough on people and expectations and, it's a hard. What were some things you maybe took from that and brought with you?
Oh my God, so much. I mean, to keep it short, but really, first of all, you learn, and many marketeers will not like that I say that, but you learn to be very fact-based, much more than most marketeers are. For example, one of the first lessons they teach you the hard way is to not use the words "I think" anymore. One of my bosses told me, François, no one cares what you think. You cannot use your instinct and your judgment. You need to prove your argument. You need to prove your case and recommendation. You need to be very analytical in the way you analyze performance, in the way you calculate return of investments. Another word that the consultant use a lot, they say you should avoid journalism.
Okay.
For them, journalism is when you're trying to explain something, a performance or a situation. You should avoid looking for those catchy headlines that make sense apparently.
Yeah.
But when you dig deeper, you realize it's not the case, or you realize that what you thought was a good explanation for something only explains half, So really this idea of being thorough, deep, and avoiding journalism. And another big thing that I've learned is to work broad. Like when you work in consulting, almost regardless of the assignments, you need to take into account all the dimensions of a situation. So even if it's a marketing strategy case or project, you need to take into account supply chain complexities, P&L structure, the company values, the impact on the organization, et cetera, et cetera. So you work both deep and wide.
Right. The great guy, Thomas Barta, you may know Thomas, but he talks about kind of the principles of marketing leadership, but he talks about that slightly differently, but that idea of kind of broad and wide. But it's hard. It's a skill you have to learn.
You learn the hard way. Consulting years are very difficult, for the ego as well, because you work with very smart people who are more intelligent than you, that are very demanding on themselves, on you. It's a culture of feedback. So at the end of every project, you have a feedback on 16 dimensions. So there is always something that you're not doing well, so really you learn the hard way.
Is any of that, because that can be incredibly helpful, but, if you brought that with you, the 16 dimensions of feedback in your current roles, or have you kind of felt, well, there's a version of that somewhere in the middle? Is it a bit too much?
It is a bit too much, because when you come out of consulting, you are very demanding on your teams. And sometimes you don't realize that not everybody's at the same speed. They don't have the same level of expectations. And you tend, or you could appear like you are never satisfied, or you are always pushing for perfection. You are so focused, for example, on writing presentation decks perfectly that when you go back to the real world or to a normal company, pushing for that is too much. So you almost have to limit yourself. So you should, I've learned, with the years to take the good things that I described, but also make sure that I was not behaving too much as a consultant within a company, because that doesn't work.
It doesn't work. I've worked with someone like that behind, and quite brutal. Tell me a bit about what you learned in, the likes of Pepsi, like going to New York, being seeing Pepsi, but then that Lipton Ice, incredible, bringing all that together. Pepsi's obviously, or PepsiCo is a wonderful marketing organization. Like it really believes in marketing. And have there been some foundational beliefs that you learned there that you've held on? Because I've talked to loads of CMOs who are like, along the way, it's really important to know what to take with you that's right for the next situation that you're in.
Yeah, actually, that's a big theme I have, which is, sometimes marketers cut and paste what they've learned in an organization into another. It's a big mistake. Or they cut and paste what works in a category onto another. They do great marketing, but for the wrong category, but that's another theme which I have passion for. No, I mean, from Pepsi, really, what my years at Pepsi taught me was, I think, two things. One, it's an American company, and Americans, without falling into cliches, there is one thing that they're obsessed about, it's profits. They really, they really care about the bottom line. So really the ability to, whatever you do, demonstrate the return of investment, the tangible return of investment in a very fact-based, concrete and undisputable way was a big constant at Pepsi. The other thing, because it's a brand company, it's all these notions of, what I call brand stewardship, for lack of a better word, which is the ability of a marketer to really feel that first and foremost, his or her responsibility is to be the brand guardian. And that has a lot of implications because not every company has that culture. In a lot of companies, marketing is there to enable the sales team to win, which is fine and noble in its own way. But I think it goes beyond this idea of brand stewardship, brand guardianship, where you need to learn sometimes to say no, either to agencies or to internal demands. The ability to stay the course and avoid zig-zagging is very important. The ability to search for growth in the right places and not in places that will, in the end, damage your brand. All those lessons I learned from PepsiCo.
Hey, that idea of avoiding zigzagging is really interesting because the dynamics of a marketing role, and I think particularly, in lots of categories, but, if you think about a category, like Pepsi, consumer facing, speed, pace, distribution, so important, pricing, so important, all the 4 P's of marketing really matter. But it is also, as you said, like a US-based company, so it's profit focused. Were the things you did to stop you and your teams zigzagging as the business needed it? Because I feel that's a real pressure point for marketers where, on a trading issue, it's what can we do tomorrow? It's, we're kind of doing everything.
Yeah, I mean, there could be a book written about that, honestly. If I have some time in the future, I'd write it. But no, fundamentally, it's difficult because you need to distinguish between what is timeless in a brand, those things you don't want to touch, or you only want to touch with extreme care, like you would touch a baby, and the things that, of course, are timely and you need to change them and adapt. And it's about pricing, but packaging, about commercialization. There are a lot of things that you can and you should adapt all the time. I had a boss at Pepsi, who used to tell me those 3 fantastic quotes stuck with me. He was saying, François, it's not because you can that you should. Actually, later I discovered it was from Jurassic Park. It was not from him. It's not because you can that you should. Another good one is because it sells that it's good. And it's true for many, brand extensions, or you could do a lot of things. Apple could launch electric shavers. They would sell some, but would it help the Apple brand? Probably not. And the last thing that he was saying which really captures this idea of brand stewardship, he was saying, if you don't defend the brand, you in marketing, who will? Right. You can't expect a general manager, a commercial director, a supply chain director to be the guardian of the brand as a marketer should.
And in that fact-based world, and it is interesting, you kind of mentioned, you said it a couple of times now, fact-based become really important. And can be sometimes a perceived disconnect, I think, between brand and fact-based, right? Yeah. What were you doing to bridge that gap, to prevent people saying, but that's a brand metric, so it's fluffy?
Yeah, well, actually, it's all a question of return of investment, really fundamentally.
Right.
However, where marketers are right is that the return is not necessarily immediately in euros or in dollars. It can be in market share. It can be in brand metrics. And also the time horizon doesn't necessarily need to be next quarter. It can be over the long run.
Right.
But it's still ROI. Yeah. The nature of the R, if you want, can vary in time and in kind, but it's still ROI. If there is no ROI, marketers should not do things, and the tendency sometimes is to think that there is another parallel world where ROI should not apply. No, That's not true. It's ROI, it's another type, but it's still return of investment.
I think that's a really brilliant distinction, I think, in the sense of the return can change. The return can be in a different time frame, but yes, it's still a return. Because I think there is a belief that the return has to be seen in some sort of immediate way, right?
Yes.
That's kind of the world we live in
now,
more so
but the ability of marketeers to have those conversations, to structure those conversations with their finance director, for example, and to really act not as a, creative specialist or, just an advertising person, but a true brand CEO is fundamental. The marketeer should be the brand CEO, which means that he or she should care about the P&L, the supply chain complexities induced by the innovations, the impact on the organization, everything that the CEO cares for completely.
All the stuff is so good because I'm just like, I'm scribbling A notes and B follow-up questions. So you see me, I'm like, ooh, that's because I think again that I love the brand CEO is a brilliant way of framing it. The finance director, we often hear, and I imagine have had many finance director and CFO that you've had to work with. I asked Johnny Cahill, he's actually in PepsiCo now. He was CMO at Heineken USA at the time. Johnny, talk to you about the finance director and CFO, CMO relationship. And he just said, Connor, there isn't just one answer to that question. There isn't just like a CFO is this kind of person. So, there's no one answer to that. You have to find a way of working with each CFO differently. Like I work with the CFO and completely understands brands. Like completely understands that what you're talking about, the investment being the short, the long, all that kind of stuff. Now, it doesn't mean we get all the things we want when we want them. Like it, does. But where are the things that you found along your way that have helped you with that CFO?
There are two things. First, I would say you shouldn't shy away from tension. Too often people believe that tension is bad and we are not aligned, and you have all that language of that's all. Tension for me is like fever. When you have fever, it's a good sign. It means your body is fighting. When you have tension between CFO and a CMO, it's okay, because what it means is that each side is actually defending a point of view and the organization needs both. It's perfect. If there is no tension, it means we don't have the right conversations. And actually when I was in consulting, when we were designing organizations, one of the things we were always thinking about doing was to create points of friction so that stakeholders, like for example, between the CMO and the market, the CMO will think about long-term brand building. That's his job. The market leader, let's say for the UK or for Spain, will think about delivering the next 12 months performance. Each of those objectives is as noble as the other one. And a good org design is when that tension is organized and channeled in the right way. The first thing I would tell you is don't shy away from conflict. It's good. I mean, of course, you shouldn't start to call each other with bad names, and the mutual challenge is very healthy. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is when you run a brand, is to understand what is your brand's role in the portfolio, because a marketer sometimes comes in and thinks that their brand must deliver growth or market share gains, or not necessarily. So I think having a good conversation with the CFO in terms of that brand in that market, what is its role? Maybe it's a profit engine, maybe it's a growth engine, maybe it's a brand to complement a portfolio. So knowing the role of that brand in the broader portfolio of the corporation, I think is very useful to have those productive conversations.
And did you, that kind of sense of friction, or I think purposeful friction in a way, look, when you have built out your marketing teams, have you looked for that as well? Because we all hire people we enjoy working with, and sometimes we can end up with homogenous teams. Were you thinking about that in your own marketing organization design as well?
Absolutely. And I would even give you an example, a recent example. I had we have a very talented marketing director in one of the countries. And she was calling me one day and saying, I love my job. I think I love the company, I love the brand. But there is one thing that is making my life a bit difficult as a new marketing director for that country, is that you, François, you are not always aligned with my boss, who is the general manager of the country. And I was like,
Yeah.
That's a development point, And I told her, I'm not going to apologize for not being aligned with that country general manager. On the contrary, you should embrace that misalignment to understand what are the two agendas that need to be reconciliated. And then when I told her that, she was suddenly, oh my God, I now understand my role better. I'm not a child complaining that my two parents are not aligning, but I am actually a pivotal node in the organization that is here to reconnect two agendas, the long-term brand agenda with the 12 months business delivery.
That is, I literally am visualizing a very similar situation, and where if exactly as marketing director, country manager, and me in more of a centralized role, and the conflicts were real. But what was really interesting was, maybe back to your early point about when you were in Toronto, is it kind of all came down to understanding the customer, the market, the culture, right? Because they became really important ways of, again, I wasn't from that country, and I would say to the person who was working with me, I was like, look, you need to help me understand that perspective that the GM has, because I don't understand it. But then you also need to help the GM understand the perspective that, from a global marketing organization point of view that we're trying to come at it from. And, it was friction, but it was such, there was a lot of respect. And I still actually I have a huge amount of respect for him as a GM, and he's doing amazing still in the same company, but it's, it's fascinating, and it takes time.
And it relates to another theme, which is something that I've noticed and struggled with my whole business life as a team leader, is the big difference there is between a local job, and how hard the transition from local to global is for even the most talented marketeers. It's a very different job.
Yeah.
And very often they struggle with that move.
It is so difficult.
The big challenge is what makes you successful in, let's say, a local role will make you very unsuccessful in the global role. Because if you work locally, what makes you a good local marketeer, let's say in Iberia or in Belgium or wherever, is you have good instinct about your markets. You build an informal network at the coffee machine with the sales director and the supply chain director. You have a team that works for you and you can drive them hard. And in the end, you work for yourself. I mean, you develop your campaign, your program for yourself. Flip that to an international role and you will see that none applies. You can no longer use your instinct because you are dealing with a broad number of markets. And to your point, you've never been there sometimes. So you don't even know that, their consumers, nothing. The team doesn't only work for you. It's a matrix organization, so you cannot drive projects so hard. The informal network at the coffee machine doesn't exist because you need to set up appointment with your partners in Italy, in Iberia, in France, in the UK, and it's much more formal. And the work you do is not for you anymore. It's to feed all those markets. So it's a very different skill sets, and it's very hard to make the transition.
Yeah, it is. It's fascinating. I think that's so well described. And I think probably that maybe ties into nicely some of the work that you've done in the recent past, and some really interesting work. And I'm going to start with Ribena. So I think anyone in this market, probably the UK as well, growing up, I remember the sticky bottle of Ribena, it would be in the press. It was open rarely. It was sticky at the top, but, incredible. And the berries, obviously a huge part of the distinctive assets. And that was part, I think, of what you started to bring that back, right?
Yeah, the story of Ribena is a fascinating one. And, I don't want to criticize the past, but it's really a good example of a brand that has, in a way, lacked a bit of firm brand stewardship. It has zigzagged a lot, and it happens for good reason. I think it started in 2015. The brand had a couple of bad years, budget were not met. And as it happens, teams start to panic. They started to play with the positioning, which was always about families and, good taste. And they started to say, well, we need to find new consumers. So let's drop families and go for teenagers. And we're about good taste and vitamin C and those things. But no, we should reinvent, and we should be about, we should innovate and do water-based product and maybe sparkling Ribena. And you start to innovate in all sorts of direction. And then the packaging, it's purple, it's iconic. Well, we should do a rainbow as opposed to purple. It will bring some news and recruit the next generation. And, and the brand starts to zigzag. And as a result, a brand that was in the top 25 of all brands in supermarkets in the UK in 2015. In 2022 was, I think, number 93. So imagine the decline, and what it means is we're talking about jobs and teams, and it's a very important thing. So what really we've done is to really try to bring back some sanity, if I can say that. Identify what was really the brand DNA, what should be the targets, and then stick to it and commit to it for the next 5-10 years. And when was the brand at its greatest, and you duplicate that. It's not rocket science.
So I'm so glad you said that, 'cause I had the pleasure of speaking to the wonderful Sir John Hegarty, and he said the same thing. He said, you go back to when the brand was at its most powerful. What were the things that were working? And it won't all be the things that can work now, because time has changed and shifted, but how do you revitalize that? How do you bring that into the modern age? But look, because the power was there, right? If you want to find out more about Tracksuit, go to gotracksuit.com and find out how they can be your affordable, always on brand tracking dashboard.
If you would like to reach an engaged community of marketing leaders, get in touch with That's What I Call Marketing to discuss sponsorship opportunities.
And why this is such a powerful technique to go back to when the brand was successful is not to simply copy what worked. It goes deeper than that. Yeah. When the brand was at its peak, when any brand was at its peak, it is very likely that the teams at the time had stumbled on a truth, a human truth or human role for the brand in consumers' lives. And those roles don't change so much. Your friend Mark Ritson always used the example of Kit Kat, have a break, have a Kit Kat. Why it's so powerful? Because regardless of technologies, new media, consumer behavior change, they always have a need for a break. So that role in their life is anchored on something very powerful. So for each brand, I think going back to when the brand was at its peak is also a way to go back to the fundamental truth and the fundamental useful job that the brand has in the lives of consumers.
Yeah, and it is so true, isn't it? The human truths, when you find really powerful ones, they stay true, don't they?
So the challenge in the case of Ribena was to tap into that heritage, that relationship that people have with the brand. A lot of consumers tell you that they are a Ribena family, But you want to do that in a way that is not making you look old or nostalgic, or So that's why we had that brand claim that that it really tastes like home, because this is the essence of the brand. It's a bit of nostalgia, but it's also my home today. It's my family today, but it also connects me with a happy childhood. But I drink it today. There is no taste like home is a really powerful claim. Yeah.
Isn't it? And it brings all that to the fore. Where did I start? I started at my childhood remembering the Ribena bottle. And what I love about where Ribena has gone is exactly what you said. It hasn't just leaned into nostalgia for the sake of nostalgia. No. It doesn't feel old. It's that now version of today, and it feels fresh.
Exactly.
Nice to have a good product.
And, when you have the right diagnosis like that, and then you write the right brief, the quality of what you get back from agencies is fabulous. And you immediately know that what they present to you is either good or not. And then you don't even need to wait for the advertising test to know it will work. And in the case of Ribena, I think it tested in the top 0.1% of all ads ever tested in the UK. But again, even if it did not test so well, I wouldn't care, because I know deep down that the brand truth is there,
Yeah, that is interesting. I want to ask you about testing. We'll come on to that. But the diagnosis, I think, is a really important point. And you just said it there. That piece, and again, it's something Mark Ritson talked about, is something that marketers we can sometimes skip.
Yes.
What is the diagnosis?
Oh, yes.
What is the problem? It's actually the joy of our job, I think. Problem solving is joy, isn't it?
Very often, those things don't change so much. If you ask consumer interviews every year, and when I take a new brand, I read everything that has been written for the past 10, 12 years. So it's 12, 15 documents. You take an afternoon, you make yourself a good coffee, and you read that. What you realize is that it doesn't change so much. The reasons why consumers were drinking or Ribena or Lucozade in 2015 are the same as they are in 2025. There is very little change. consumer tell you over and over again the same thing. The challenge is that sometimes marketers don't listen. They listen, but they don't take the so what out of the information that is written, or they are prisoner of successful past campaigns sometimes, and they feel they need to, or they are prisoners of the pressure to go and recruit the next young target. And I mean, there are a lot of behavioral flaws that make us do bad work sometimes, but it can be avoided,
Well, it's also that the targets are great, in the sense of, I have a peeve against all the, Gen X millennials, all that kind of, because every generation that has a new generation that we want to recruit.
No, there is that. You're absolutely right. There is an unnecessary fascination or obligation to, for a brand to target young people.
Yeah.
While when you look at consumer markets, half of the population is over 45. The median age in France is 43. In Spain, it's 46. In Germany, it's 47. So half of the population is over 45 years old. All the target have money. They are open-minded. They switch brands. The only shrinking group is actually the Gen Z. They are the ones shrinking, But it's interesting because when you look at traditional market studies, even, that we get even from agencies and stuff, they analyze the 18-24-year-old, the 24-34, the 34-45, and then it's over 40. It's a bit like saying, well, we're going to analyze 20 subgroups of men, and then we'll have females, It shows how blindsided we are to the subtlety, because as you and I know, a 46-year-old doesn't behave or doesn't have the same life as a 54, a 59, a 68. I mean, and these people have very different behaviors. So, we need to understand them. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, exactly. And they can be useful, but they're unuseful as well. The brackets, I think when we get obsessed about it too much, what you end up doing, I think, is you stop thinking about marketing, right? As all the stuff you talked about, fact-based, being the brand CEO, all that kind of stuff. And you start getting into really kind of small things that you're tinkering around the edges.
Absolutely.
And they're not going to matter.
Absolutely. And you are leaving aside big consumer groups that are completely underserved,
Yeah. Ribena, again, it's a wonderful example of going back to what made it great and, the power of that brand. It also operates in a category that is, I guess it has a price premium over own label. And, a lot of your work is in that space where actually you're challenged by own label. You need the strong brands. But I know another brand that you've worked on, and it's a fascinating one, is Schweppes. And Schweppes is, again, a very iconic brand. But then Fever-Tree came into the mix and actually managed to increase the price premium, increase perceptions of quality. To be fair to them, I thought they had a wonderful line, which is, if 2/3 of your gin and tonic is tonic, make it the best. And that was like,
that was a big insight.
But that wasn't it. It was amazing. And you're like, oh yeah, it is. It needs to be. Well paid, €5.
When you have a drink that costs you €15 or £15, you don't want to screw up with your tonic,
Yeah. But that then created a huge challenge for Schweppes. Like, again, was that not immediately seen? Because it probably took a bit of time for you to realize this thing was happening. I remember talking to Mark Sands from Diageo, and he was talking about Hendrick's gin and saying I can't remember what country he was in, maybe it was Sweden or somewhere. And he said, I saw all these people drinking gin with cucumber in it. And he was like, oh my God, this is new. What was it for you guys that you realized there was something new?
So clearly it's a case of disruption, which tells you that even in good old established consumer markets like soft drinks, you can actually bring some fundamental strategic breakthrough, because that's a strategic breakthrough,
Yeah.
No, one of the things it forced us to rethink, and again, I think it links to this idea of target that we just talked about. Our marketeers on Schweppes, they knew one thing about Schweppes, which is that 3/4 of tonic is consumed by people over 50 years old. And actually over half is consumed by people over 65 years old. So it's really a product that is consumed by older people. But always the marketing was for 18-34. Even the product tests that we did in the past, the sip test to make sure the formula is good, was made with consumer group of 18 to 34, which is a heresy. It's like you you have a product consumed by some, like you sell dark chocolate and you have it only tasted by teenagers. It doesn't make any sense, Through your Fever Tree and with all that, it pushed us as a company to rethink the strategy and to say, okay, who is really consuming us? These targets. Therefore, what are these target real needs and how do they live and what do they want? And then you start to understand truly and deeply those older consumer groups. You realize that what they love is to socialize, to relax, to take their time with their friends. And it landed us to that platform of Take Your Time, which is now our communication campaign. And we are now unapologetic internally and with our agencies that we are targeting people over 45. But you know what, Connor? When I wrote the brief on Schweppes for the new campaign, Take Your Time, the advertising agencies that we briefed, both of them we briefed to, they both told me, and it's incredible, I still cannot believe, they told me we have never received a brief like that. We have never received a brief for a mainstream consumer brand for a target over 50 years old. Every brief, if the consumer target of a brand is young, they tell us to target the youth. If the consumer target of a brand is older, they tell us to rejuvenate and therefore target the youth. Targeting the youth is always the default option. It's very rare. I mean, according to these companies, these agencies, it was never the case that a client briefs them on all the targets intentionally. Incredible.
Wow.
Incredible.
That is. Which means like there's such space there to, work is actually interesting.
Yes, to understand these consumers, to serve them, to target them. By the way, as I mentioned before, they have money. They are cheap to target because they watch TV. Yes.
I was going to say they still watch TV.
You know what you find them at 8:30 p.m. They are in front of their TV, so you don't need to spend a fortune on TikTok influencers and, you know where they are, They shop in retail, they buy for the whole family. They are very open-minded, so they switch brands, are ready to pay for quality. I mean, it's a wonderful group to target.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I do love that they are watching TV. How do you manage that kind of, I'll use the cliche, but the fragmentation of media, because it is incredibly hard. I mean, that's a nice one because you're like, I know they're watching TV. They still watch TV, but like with other products you're marketing, it's probably broader. You have to think about all the different channels. Do you have any hard and fast rules on, I can't imagine you have very many hard and fast rules, but do you have any kind of guiding principles that are, we do want to make sure we've got a certain reach on TV regardless of the audience? Like, how do you think about the media mix?
I would say two big ideas. One is the idea of threshold. It's tempting to do a lot of small things, but when you manage a big brand, in order to move the needle, you need those things to be big. And it's true that it's reassuring to do 20 activities on a brand, but you are much better off if you do 5 in a big way. So really this idea of threshold, which is, to your point, this idea that every touch point should have a sufficient reach, sufficient frequency in order to make a difference, is not something that intuitively most people grasp, but it's very important when you look at the data. So that's number one. Number two, there is we operated a big shift in the way we select the activities that we do, the activities on which we spend marketing investment. Before, we were doing a lot of marketing mix modeling, which is an analytical tool that many companies use and that tell you which media is the most efficient, and it typically tells you very precisely you should increase your budget from 45.2% to 52%, very small iterative things like that. And it's a tool that media agencies love. Why do they love them? Because the budget stays within media. It tells you, take your money from TV and put it in outdoors or in digital, but it stays within the family of media and within their billing, What we've done is we've moved to another type of marketing studies, which are touchpoint studies, consumer touchpoint studies, which tell you completely agnostically whether it's media, in-store, sponsoring, branding in restaurants, sampling, free gift with gift boxes, whatever the touch point is, it tells you which one are the most influential. And it helped us move sometimes money from media sampling or from TV to branding of menus in bars, And it's really nice because you are becoming then completely agnostic of whether it's media or not. The distinction media, not media, is very marketing centric. Consumers don't think that way. If they walk into a Tesco and they see a giant display, they don't think, oh, that's below the line. And, for them, if they listen to the ad on the radio, or if they receive a sample as they walk in a street, or if they go to Tesco and see a display, it's the same brand activity. So we should think about marketing touch points absolutely the same way. And that's why we are trying to, as much as we can, to not use tools like marketing mix modeling, which confine us to a pre-established set of touch points. Yes.
And is there agencies that you're using for this?
Well, there is a tool called MCA, Market Contact Audit, which is the analysis you do on all those touch points, and that give you, which one are the most influential, what are the threshold levels, if some activities have a domino effect on others. Sometimes you do an activity and it makes other activities more efficient. But then most importantly, once we have the research results, what we do is that we meet cross-functionally. So we put in the same room, in every market, the marketing director, the sales director, the finance director, and the market CEO, and we decide what we do for next year. And we argue, we debate, and based on the research, we can then reallocate money. Sometimes if you are the CMO like me, or if you are the general manager of that market, you can actually make those trade-offs, which are so important.
Are you able to factor in any testing in as part of that as well?
It's never purely science. It's completely art and science. So if you have a great ad like Ribena, for example, you would tend to spend a bit more behind it than you would otherwise. But, it's fact-based. But it's already, the alignment is built in because everybody signs off, So you leave the room, you shake the hand with your finance and commercial director, and you have your plan.
Done. We're coming close to the end of our time together, which is absolutely flown by. But I said we'd get back to testing because you mentioned the Ribena, that we talked about testing there more in the kind of marketing test, but you were talking about the creative and you said it tested really well. But you had your gut feeling that it was good. Tell me a bit about that. If that had come back and hadn't tested as well as it had, right? How would you, as someone who's fact-based and database, how would you step that across the line and say, okay, I know it didn't, here's why it's.
I will disappoint you. I will tell you that. I will tell you that I don't, please don't repeat that to anyone, and I will pretend I never said it. No, but there are no tests out there that can scientifically predict the impact of an advertising on sales. If an agency or a research provider tells you that they can predict the impact of advertising on sales, I think they're lying. Because if that was true, their algorithm will be worth more than Google, because that would be the holy grail. What more honest, or let's say more reasonable agencies tell you, or data providers tell you, is that they can help you improve your advertising. So when you get a test result back, it's a lot of diagnosis measure. They tell you consumers don't remember the brand name enough, or they tell you they don't understand the joke that you're trying to make in the ad, or they don't remember the message that there is a new flavor. Okay, so equipped with that result, you can tweak your ad. But I don't give any credit to those advertising tests to tell you whether or not an ad will have an impact. I've worked on, there's a benefit of having a bit of gray hair. I've worked on ads that tested really well and had zero impact on the business. And conversely, ads that were rated average or mediocre that had the best impact because they were emotional and, because all those tests, they come with their biases. So they are not reliable as a measure to predict ROI, but they are very valuable to, to give you diagnosis on what works.
Okay. That's a great way of looking at it as well. And because it is, it's interesting. I know a friend of mine, he would always test his ads that he's worked on, but there was one ad that didn't test well. And he used it as I'm going to use this to try and make the things that aren't working better, but still not live. And it had a big impact, So the risk, the risk not testing is one, when you've got budgets. If you can afford to test, you probably should test, but then it's not being held to the results of the test and saying, it's not going to work. You have the gut comes in, the art comes in.
I remember an ad that we did a few years ago when I was at Pepsi on Tropicana. This ad was simply flying fruits, beautiful macro photos of gorgeous fruits with the song of Louis Armstrong, "What a Wonderful World." The ad was moving. But then the test results came back as consumer don't understand the message. Well, yeah, there is no message. Consumer don't walk away with information. No, there is no information. It was purely about glorifying the fruit and the juice. So we went on and we put the ad on air despite the advertising test being all red, best decision of my life. The sales flew off. I mean, it was a big success, and it taught me to take those tests with a grain of salt. And it's like everything is art and science. It's not to say that we should always overrule the result. It's a bit like a GPS, it gives you a direction, but if you see something on the road, there is a truck blocking the road. Well,
this is my last question for you. We touched on private label and, that, and, I think where you're competing is, brands that have a price premium and are up against private label. It's incredible challenge. And I've been lucky to speak to other brands like Kellogg's, for example, have just done that wonderful master brand work and, really trying to elevate the brand. And so that, I think the brand power helps pricing. It's well known, but how are you seeing that play out and how are you planning for it? Because it is a real challenge.
It's more and more difficult actually, because consumer wallets are under pressure. That's number one. Number two, something that is sometimes overlooked is that when you look at the manufacturing side, the ability to produce high quality private label has gone up a lot. There are a lot of co-packers, third parties that can help retailers produce super high quality private label, which was not the case, let's say 15 years ago. The competition is really difficult. So the way we look at it is to say a brand to be successful, a brand to resist private label, we invented a little model here at Suntory called DAQV. It shows that a brand to survive against private label needs to be desirable, obviously, affordable, which means having the right price, but also the right packs, the right formats. It needs to be high quality, meaning, once you're desired, you need to walk the talk and not disappoint. When consumers desire you because they love your packaging or they have seen your advertising, once they drink you, the experience, for example, the thickness of the juice of Ribena needs to be there, to quality. And the last dimension is visibility. So you need to be visible, because if you are not seen or if you're not thought of, so both mental and physical, you are losing. So we are convinced that if a brand has this DAQV, if it is desirable, affordable, delivers high quality, and is visible, it's in a good shape to resist against private label. But if you are missing one of the four, you need to only miss one of the four.
Wow. It's tough. Like it's, you see, I think any marketer looking at kind of the portfolio of brands that you have, the beautiful brands, iconic brands, brands with history, with creativity, but it's like tough markets to operate in and tough conditions. But isn't that, again, we go back to the problem solving.
Absolutely. I love working in this industry because, brands are very big and iconic. Consumers care about brands, like when they buy a Coke or Red Bull or Lucozade, they buy a Coke, a Red Bull or Lucozade. They don't buy any, and it's a business with high volume and decent margins, which means selfishly for marketeers, you have big budgets to play with, So that's nice.
It's nice. François, thank you so much. It's been such a joy speaking to you. I really appreciate you.
You're welcome, Conrad. It was a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did and can rate or review it or share it with even one other person who you think might enjoy it, it is a great way for us to reach even more people in this wonderful marketing community, and I really appreciate your support. There's over 43,000 people tuning into That's What I Call Marketing every single week. Again, thanks to the guys at gotracksuit.com. It is the always on affordable brand tracking dashboard, and the team are standing by ready to show you how you can have always on monthly brand tracking that will enable you to talk about the return on investment for your business. So get in touch with gotracksuit.com. And of course, I'm happy to speak to you about my experience using the platform and also introduce you to anyone at Tracksuit. If you would like an introduction from myself to the team there, just let me know. Thanks a million for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the episode with François today. Really fantastic. Listen, thank you so much as always for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. And so until the next episode, take care.